I'm going to count down, and on 1, I'm going to go ahead and hit broadcast. Have a good time. 3,
Thank you.
2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deb Engel-Collin, and I am the Relationship Manager for the Miller Introduction to Judaism program here at American Jewish University. We are going to start in just a moment. I'm just giving people time to come in and get into this webinar format. So I'm watching as our participants come in, and we welcome you all here. We know that people are here from all over the United States, Canada, and we're thrilled that you are joining us this evening for the Yachad Together, spirited by American Jewish University. Just going to give it another moment or two before we begin. Great. Good evening again, everyone. My name is Deb Engel-Collin. I'm the Relationship Manager for the Miller Introduction to Judaism program here at American Jewish University, and I welcome you all here to be Yachad Together, spirited by AJU. American Jewish University advances and elevates the Jewish journey of individuals, organizations, and our community through excellence in scholarship, teaching, engaged conversation, and outreach. This B'Yachad platform was developed to deliver online learning that captures the insights of our faculty and friends and convenes our diverse and inclusive community to advance ideas, dialogue, and debate. Tonight, we welcome you to the latest discussion that is part of our Justice We Shall Pursue series. American Jewish University stands opposed to all forms of racism and all bigotry. We affirm our support for all our students, staff, and community members who are pursuing justice at this moment. Our work is driven by the Jewish values of justice, tzedek, equality under the law, mishpat, and acts of kindness, chesed. Our lifeblood as an educational institution is to increase access for all we serve to open inquiry, vigorous conversations, moral engagement, and disciplined learning. We are using our power as a university to host conversations around structural racism and its pernicious impact on our society. Tonight's conversation, Understanding What Defund the Police Means, is the latest segment of our Justice We Shall Pursue series. Tonight we have Rabbi Aryeh Cohen, who is Professor of Rabbinic Studies at American Jewish University, Kogod Senior Research Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America, Rabbi in Residence at Ben the Ark Jewish Action, Southern California, and co-chair of the Board of Directors of CLU, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. His latest book, Justice in the City, An Argument from the Sources of Rabbinic Judaism, is available as well. Today, Rabbi Cohen will be in conversation with Pastor Cue Jn'Marie, a former Virgin Records artist with a rap group called College Boys, the group that brought you Victim of the Ghetto. Pastor Cue heard a call from God in 1994 while watching the movie Malcolm X. He then left the music industry and began following this call. In an attempt to understand human struggles and suffering, Cue has traveled and has been involved with international service missions for over 15 years and has been to Thailand, Vietnam, West Africa, Guatemala, and several other countries, which has helped to shape his worldview. Pastor Cue is a visionary church planter and co-founder and former executive pastor of New Song LA Covenant Church, and a graduate of the Passing the Mantle program at the University of Southern California. He is the co-convener of the Black and Brown Clergy Coalition, as well as the Black Jewish Justice Alliance in the city of Los Angeles, as a faith-rooted organizer and part-time staffer with Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. Pastor Cue is the founder and director of Creating Justice LA and is also the pastor of the Row LA, aka the Church Without Walls in downtown Los Angeles Skid Row community for the past 14 years. With tonight's webinar, we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A section on our, which you can find on the bottom of your screen generally. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to you, Rabbi Cohen and Pastor Cue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. Good evening, Pastor. It's good to see you.
Good evening to you. Hope all is well.
Yes, well, you know, everything is, all is well, and in this time, it's always all is well with an asterisk, and given the COVID and the uprising and things, but all is well here. Thank you. I hope all is well with you too. So I thought we'd start with, there's a whole lot to talk about, and there's also a whole lot to talk about in what Deb just pointed to, and I think they lead one into the other. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, about getting from schoolboys to the Church Without Walls, which unfortunately most people probably don't know about the Church Without Walls. So if you could talk a little bit about how that transition happened, if you see it as a continuity or discontinuity, that would be great.
Well, you know, I, of course, pastor the Church Without Walls in Skid Row. Skid Row is probably America's homeless capital here in Los Angeles. And I began in I believe, you know, let's just say years ago. I was touring around 1994. I was touring. I had signed a record deal with Virgin Records. I had left Texas, which is the place I lived after I migrated from the Caribbean, left Texas after high school with my rap group, came to Los Angeles to seek a record deal. And 1 year later, we were signed to Virgin Records with Richard Bronson. And the rest is history. And one night during a concert, I just felt that my life was spinning. You know, music industry can be it can take you in many different directions, let's just say. But after that, I began to think about spirituality. I moved, I came home from a tour, went to watch the movie Malcolm X in 1994. And after the movie, I felt like there were two phrases that were being spoken to me, not in an audible voice, but very strong in my spirit. He died too soon. I want you to be like him for me. He died too soon. I want you to be like him for me. 3 times in my spirit. Again, it wasn't audible, but it was strong. And so after that, I went back, did a few more concerts, and then I came back a little while after and did my very last concert. I believe it was in Arizona with Tupac Shakur, the late Tupac Shakur, and decided to take the challenge and to heed the call that I felt like I heard months ago.
Wow. And so most people, when you say, I think it's important to stress that when you say the Church Without Walls, that's not a metaphor. The church is really a church without walls. Right?
The Church Without Walls is on the streets of Skid Row. We do almost everything you would do in a church, except we do it outside. And so in my faith tradition, the person I think of oftentimes when I think about the Church Without Walls is John the Baptist, where he says, "I'm the voice of the one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord." And so I'm the voice of the one crying out from the streets, prepare the way of the Lord. And so I believe that that's the call. And when we say without walls, we also mean that it is not without structure, but we don't allow structure to hinder us from doing what we need to do, especially as it relates to expressing love to others.
There's a great story that's, in the Hasidic tradition, the Jewish tradition, about the Baal Shem Tov, who said, or one of the students of the founders of Hasidut, who said, everybody wants to be a rebbe or a master to great pious people, but who's going to be the master to the thieves and to the marginalized?
Mm.
And they, and so I think that's, very similar. It's not everybody who goes out to find their congregation on the streets. I also, I mean, when the coronavirus started, so you were in a very unique position together with, I think, Community Coalition, or LA Can, to tend to people who were basically forgotten. Can you talk a little bit about trying to make sure that folks on the street also had ways to wash their hands and get food when the city didn't?
Yeah. Well, when the coronavirus occurred, we didn't know what to do, just like everyone else. We knew that this could be a deadly, fatal disease. And so the city moved, and the governor came out and said, hey, we're going to have over 100,000 hotel rooms. We're going to, basically get access to those hotel rooms, purchase the rooms, and allow homeless folks to be able to sleep in those rooms in order to social distance and stay safe. At the end of the day, we realized that only, I think, just in Los Angeles, only about a little bit over 1,000 people were put in hotel rooms. And so that was kind of disheartening for us. But initially, the city put out some hand washing stations in order for people to try to stay, as clean as they could and practice good hygiene as much as they could on the street. However, upon investigation, our community partner in Los Angeles, Community Action Network, found out that the hand washing stations were being depleted within 24 hours, and they weren't being replenished. And so we took it upon ourselves to start building our own hand washing station and actually hiring folks from the community in different encampments to actually man those hand washing stations, and so gave folks the ability to wash their hands. We were on the ground educating folks about COVID-19, making sure they got the information, because obviously they weren't getting it any other way. And we know that we felt like they were left to die on the street. And we know that God always has a way of working, and it just so happened that the coronavirus is more deadly inside than outside. And so that was one of the things that saved our community. I believe had it been a virus that was more deadly and more contagious, most of the people on the streets would have died because the city, I felt, left them to die. And so we did the best we could, made sure we provided PPE equipment, masks, gloves in the beginning, made sure folks washed their hands, and we had to continue to do what we do as a church, and that is to provide meals and clothing and different hygiene kits and different things like that. The same thing we've done for the past 14 years. We couldn't continue to have services, normal service. We couldn't congregate anybody or anything like that, but we continued to feed people, and we continued to provide education around COVID-19, have people practice social distancing as they're standing in line, getting ready to eat, and all of that stuff. And as a result, we found out that the infection rate inside missions were higher than they were outside on the streets.
Wow. So I just want to pause a minute and tell people that if there are any questions, there's a Q&A function on the bottom of the screen, and you could write your questions there, and we'll get to, at the end, we'll get to as many as we can. I wanted to, so at the same time that all this was going on, you had been involved with Black Lives Matter for a bunch of years, and this was, and the way I see it, I don't see it as different this work on the row is that different from your work with Black Lives Matter? And tell me if I'm wrong, but that the mutual aid is also kind of a political, in addition to being religious, is also a political statement about the community creating for themselves and establishing themselves.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it, again, in the Christian faith tradition, there's a story about Jesus, right, being the rabbi that he was, meeting a woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, and she was brought to the square to be stoned for her crime by the community and religious leaders, led by religious leaders. And so Jesus called him out and said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." I think Jesus addressed, and of course they walked away, and then he said to the woman, "Where are your accusers?" And she goes, "Well, they're gone." And he goes, "Well, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And I believe what Jesus did there was he addressed several issues. Number one, he addressed patriarchy, right? Because they were all men, and according to the Old Testament, both the man and the woman was supposed to be brought to be stoned, but they only brought the woman, right? In a patriarchal society, just like our society would probably do something like that. So Jesus addressed the injustice of that system, right? And then he freed the woman from capital punishment. And so the work that we do as it relates to policing and how our society polices its most vulnerable citizens or marginalized citizen is directly related to something that Jesus would do. So definitely I follow Jesus, and definitely I see myself as a disciple of Jesus. I would say that quicker than I would say that I'm a Christian.
That's an interesting way to put it. So I wanted to talk about a little the origins of Black Lives Matter, and especially in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. People know it started around after the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Three women started using the hashtag Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza, and I'm forgetting your name. But
begins with a T. I can't remember how to say it.
I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Opal.
Yeah. And the hashtag caught on because after George Zimmerman was released, it seemed to say that Black lives didn't matter.
Right.
And so that's been the rallying cry, that Black Lives Matter, and in organizing in Los Angeles around police murders, and we have the kind of the killingest force in the country, or one of the killingest forces in the country. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about one of the fascinating things that I like about Black Lives Matter is that they've had a weekly vigil outside Jackie Lacey's office, and all of their vigils are a combination of political and spiritual. They start the vigil by pouring a libation. They call the ancestors. It seems like in the Jewish tradition, there's something called the Shiva, which is mourning, and they tell stories of the dead. And at all these, at the Jackie Lacey vigils, families of people who have been shot tell their stories. People mourn and grieve together. Dr. Melina Abdallah is always there, and she's pastoring to them. Do you want to talk about how this came about and how this generates the activism that ended up in Defund the Police?
Well, I mean, we as a people, as a diasporic people from the transatlantic slave trade, right? We can't, when it comes to policing, we can't separate that from that experience, because the American experience of policing had never included Black folks to begin with. In fact, it came about as a result of slave catchers after the Fugitive Slave Act, right? So there is a long history. So before we even talk about how to stay safe as a society today, we have to understand the origins of that. And so one of the people I like to mention is Nat Turner, who caused an insurrection, right? Because of slavery. Nat Turner felt like he was being led by God. He was a preacher. He was taught the colonizer's religion from his slave master. In fact, his name, we don't know what Nat Turner's real name was, his African name, because Turner was his slave. Well, he was owned by his slave master because he was born into a slave plantation, and so we don't know his last name. But we call him Turner. This is the reason why Malcolm X changed his name. But Nat Turner was deeply spiritual, and he felt like God instructed him to cause that insurrection, right? To free his people who were being brutalized and raped and worked for free. The same thing with Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, who saw visions from God, just like Nat Turner saw visions from God, and felt like God led her to make those 13 journeys as an abolitionist to free folks from slavery. So when we begin our meetings, kind of speaking and remembering our ancestors who've been part of this struggle for a long time. We pour libations, remembering those who've fought this fight, those who've been part of the struggle, and those who have died of senseless violence like Emmett Till, and those who've died of senseless violence like Trayvon Martin and George Stinney, those who've died of senseless violence like Martin Luther King, those who've been taken away from us of senseless violence like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and even 11-year-old Tamar Rice, and even Botham Jean, who was in his house eating ice cream, who is from the same island that I was born in St. Lucia, by the way. My name is Jn'Marie, his name is Botham Jean. And so the people of the diaspora has always been under what we call colonizers who continue to be biased in the way they treat Black folks because of the original history of Black people here in America and in other places in the world. Even when you look at Brazil, where there are more Black people, police violence in Brazil is actually higher than it is here in America. So we know it's something spiritual and something deep. So we have to fight it, not just on a physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm.
Right, that's powerful, and it's also really, I think that's a really important point, that the current police violence, or the way that the structural racism, the structural violence of the police forces, are related back to where they started. Police forces were structured to protect certain people and not to protect other people. They were structured to protect white people. I mean, there was always this, because of the violence of slave masters, there was always a fear of slave insurrection, of slave rebellion. And there were lots of slave rebellions, and people were under oppression and were enslaved. And so that's how and over the years, in various different guises, whether it was during Reconstruction or then through Jim Crow and currently, the structure of the police forces in terms of who they're protecting and who they're not protecting hasn't changed that much.
No, it hasn't.
So I wanted to, which brings us kind of to the moment of defund the police, which is become part of the popular discourse now, but didn't just become part of the discourse amongst activists. So can you talk about how that kind of evolved into realizing that the way to get it is to defund the police and invest in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with this hot summer of 1967. Actually, I would start with 1965, the Watts Rebellion. Right after, in the 60s is when they began to call, through systemic racism is when they began to call uprising of people who had been brutalized by police. They began to call them riots, but back before then they weren't called riots, they were called uprisings. And we still say uprisings today, but after that, after the Watts riot, which evolved out of police brutality, the McCone Commission report came out and they gave some recommendations in that report. And then there was the hot summer of 1967, where there were 163 rebellions or uprisings here in America. The whole nation was burning because Black folks had had enough. And so in 67, this is a year before Dr. King was assassinated, right? All of this is going on. And in 67, Lyndon Johnson, LBJ, put together the Kerner Commission. And so the Kerner Commission, in order to find out why this happened and what can we do to prevent it from occurring again. And through the Kerner Commission, there were some recommendations made. And with the McCone Commission and the Kerner Commission, they all said, well, we need more Black folks in the police forces and we need more training, right? Echoes of what we are hearing today. And after the 67, the hot summer of 67, because the city was burning for the entire summer, cities all across the nation were burning for the entire summer. LBJ was trying to deal with that. But after 67, then you get to 1992, right? The Rodney King riots, right? They called it, but there were systemic issues occurring in the communities that were putting different marginalized groups against each other, like Koreans and Black folks. And the same thing that happened during the Japanese internment where Black folks were, because there was a housing shortage in the 1940s and Black folks were migrating from the South after they were fleeing from the KKK and Jim Crow and also looking for work. They migrated to Los Angeles to the north and to the west, and then into South Central, down Central Avenue, into Little Tokyo right here in Los Angeles, and occupied buildings that were vacated by Japanese who were interned by the same system. And then the Japanese came back 3 years later, and Black folks had to move out now because the landlords were saying, okay, now that the model minority is back, we want to get rid of you guys. And so all of these commissions that had occurred as a result of police brutality made recommendations. They always start a new bureau, or they say we need more training. And as a result, even the 1994 crime bill they said, well, we need community policing. So with the 1994 crime bill, that was supposed to be a crime bill that put more police in the community, but we know that fueled mass incarceration. We know there's no dispute that our policing system has been unjust. Give Black folks more time for crack cocaine than it did white folks for powdered cocaine. We know the discrepancies in our, we want to call it a justice system, but in our injustice system that has never treated Black folks correctly. And so a broken clock is right twice a day. So when Black folks get justice in a system, that's only twice a day. And if there's an injustice that goes towards a Black person, most people would say O.J. Simpson was an injustice that favored Black people. That clock was only wrong twice a day. If it was only, that clock was wrong all day long, and it was only right once a day on that part. It wasn't even right twice a day. So when we think about all of these things, we're saying, look, it is the same system, right? This has been the same system. We've tried to reform the system. We keep trying to reform the system. This system keeps killing our people. Breonna Taylor murdered in her home, right? They went to the wrong home. And then you have some folks in the dominant culture who are actually saying that we deserve to die because we are the ones who are causing police to kill us. And when you see that, for us, what it does, it continues to pile trauma upon trauma. So we say we cannot reform this system, but we have to dismantle this system and start something different. So the call to defund the police is not a call for lawlessness, but a stern rebuke of the notion that safety is merely the absence of crime. Safety is not merely the absence of crime. We know that the safest communities are not the safest communities because they have more police. They're the safest communities because they have more resources. Psalm 30:7 says, "Oh God, please," he said, "don't give me too much," the writer says, "because if you do, I may forget about you and stop calling your name. But don't give me too little to where I will go steal and dishonor your name." So when we have a system that continues to oppress people, that system is calling people or causing people to dishonor God's name by committing crime. And so if that be the case, it is up to us who are supposed to be clergy or religious leader to hold that system accountable so people can honor God's name.
Thank you. Yeah, that's powerful, and that's one of the questions that people are asking. I think it's one of the major pushbacks from outside the Black communities or communities of color is who's going to protect us. And I think that part of the issue is that historically Black communities and communities of lower income have been over policed and under protected. That there's lots of police, but crimes aren't solved. There's a very low closure rate. So it's not that. So it's not that a lot of police there are helping the communities, but rather it's causing more friction. Somebody said, half in joke, if you want to see what a community looks like, which doesn't have, in which they don't have cops, but rather they invest in schools and healthcare and other social resources, go to Beverly Hills, because they're you're not going to find that over policing there, but they're going to be overprotected while being under policed.
I mean, Rabbi, it's not rocket science, right? We know how this nation began. I was just reading about Bruce Beach right here down the street at Manhattan Beach that was taken from Black folks who owned property right there at Bruce Beach because they said Black people shouldn't own property on the coast because it's not good for tourism. No one wants to come to property that's owned by Black folks. So systemic racism goes deep, deep, deep in this country. I could talk about the freeways and how the freeways created suburbs and ghettos and actually created what the Kerner Commission of 1967 warned about. It said we were creating two Americas and eventually it will be so divided that we won't know what to do. And that's where we are today. We have the police are actually protecting segregation. That's what they're doing. They're enforcing segregation. They are overly policing one community in order to keep the suburbs safe. There's no two ways about it. And so, for example, in spending, and 54% of our budget goes to law enforcement here in the city of Los Angeles, in spending for our street vendor program, where poor people are trying to make a living by street vending, with $6 million allocated towards enforcement and only $350,000 goes toward outreach and education for street vending. We have $6 million allocated towards enforcement, right? We know that in recent years, $100 million allocated towards houselessness. People say homelessness, but we say houselessness in Skid Row, yet 85% of that $100 million went towards the police department. So we are policing people of color and protecting other people.
Yeah, that's powerful. Somebody in the audience asked the question, says the LA Times reported today about the increase in homeless people killing themselves by hanging here in LA. Can you comment on that? And what, if any, kind of mental health services are being provided, especially during this time of COVID-19? And I think that comes into the same question of where the resources are and where the resources aren't.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're going to see a whole lot more, right? This is not, for me, it's grieving. It hurts my heart because I know a lot of our people are going through a lot. I've been pastoring Skid Row for, 14 years. Depending on who you ask, anywhere from 70 to 75% of the people who are houseless in Skid Row are Black folks. People are definitely hanging themselves, not just Black folks, but folks who are houseless. It's causing just distress and people can't handle it anymore. People are not, 70% of the people who are houseless are not on drugs, right? 70% of the people who are houseless are not on drugs, and they're not mentally ill. Maybe 29% according to the numbers. And most of those people are houseless because we have 1.3 million people prior to COVID-19 who are at risk of being houseless, right? The mayor and the city council continue to make decisions, even now, that prioritize the interests of developers and wealthy donors over people they're sworn to serve. Homelessness has risen.
Can we just clarify that in danger of homelessness means that people are like one paycheck away from not being able to
exactly one paycheck away from being houseless, and that was prior to COVID-19. You had 1.3 million people, right? That was prior to COVID-19. What do you think it's going to be? We're anticipating over 350,000 people or something like that who are going to be facing eviction pretty soon.
Right.
So
August 16th is the deadline on the last moratorium on evictions.
Right. So we can't police our way out of that. When you're focused on just crime and you're not focused on public safety, that's why we say reimagine public safety. The mayor tried to use our words to create the CSP, a new bureau of community policing, but it has been shown that even, and the mayor touted this study from UCLA by Jeffrey Brantenham, who is the lead researcher and who is, by the way, created the controversial predpol algorithm that has been condemned by academics as fundamentally flawed and for contributing to increased racial bias. And more recently, Brandenham led the Pentagon-funded project to develop an algorithm that relies on outdated LAPD data to automatically classify crimes as gang-related. So all of these things are together, and when you have people who don't have the resources they need, what the city is going to do is take is going to take the route of least resistance, and they're just going to get more police because they think they're just focused on decreasing crime. But our role as a society is not primarily to decrease crime, but to create safe communities. And we don't do that simply by having more police.
Right. Yeah. So I want to just to pivot a little bit. As you know, one of the meetings we were on today is going to be the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, and there were two speeches. The speech everybody remembers there were many speeches, but the speech everybody remembers is, of course, Martin Luther King's "I Had a Dream" speech. But John Lewis also gave a speech, and he was more radical. They actually made him tone down his speech a little bit, but he ended off his speech saying, they're talking about slow down and stop. We will not stop. All the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman, those were racist sheriffs and Congress people, will not stop this revolution. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson. I think in the original one, he said, we will go through the South like Sherman. Through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham, but we will march with the spirit of love and the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. So what I wanted to ask you is, somebody asked about, what the future looks like. And, I know you're not a prophet. You have prophetic voice, but I know you're not a prophet. But there is a tension, there's always been a tension between, as Reverend Cohen and Professor Cohen said, there's a tension between Malcolm and Martin, between nonviolence and violence, and I know that you experience this tension. We've spoken about it a little bit, but at the same time, you convene the Black Jewish Justice Alliance together. We do it together. You convene the Black and Brown Clergy Alliance, and so. What does the future look like to you? Does it look like, the beautiful community, or does it look like chaos?
Well, we are in chaos right now, right? Because we did not heed the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. He goes, where do we go from here, community or chaos? And I believe we can have community. We can have the beloved community, but we have to be brave enough and courageous enough to reimagine public safety. We've got to reimagine public safety, not thinking about public safety as crime fighting or the suppression mainly of crime. That is not public safety. Let me give you an example. We created mass incarceration by being tough on crime with the 1994 crime bill with your boy, your new soon-to-be president probably, or potentially, Joe Biden. We created this prison industrial complex. We threw people who were nonviolent into that system. And now we have thousands of people now who were indoctrinated and trained to be violent in a violent system. We thought we were being tough on crime and creating public safety. We were actually making the public less safe. Safe initially, we thought, but when you put so many people, especially people who aren't violent, and you put them in a place where there may be people who are more violent than they are, and you created this tension in prison, what do you think happened? You create a camp-like atmosphere, and now you created more people who would behave violently. Right. And so we've got to reimagine public safety. We've got to be courageous. I'm an artist. And we're in Hollywood. So we should be able here in Los Angeles, here in California, to reimagine public safety. Let me be clear. Black folks, just like I don't know my real African last name, we didn't ask to come to the West. We didn't ask to be brought. We lost our culture. Our culture of policing or community safety looks nothing like the European culture of policing that we inherited here in America. So for us, we have no choice but to reimagine public safety. People ask me all the time, who will fight crime? I said, we can figure that out together, but here's the question. Who's gonna stop them from killing us for no reason?
Right. That's really important. I mean, I think that what you just said is really important, that we have to believe in our ability to figure this out together, which doesn't mean pie in the sky, unicorns are going to come down, but rather when you incarcerate people, you don't only, and for either for nonviolent crimes or even somebody who's in a bar fight or somebody got, that's not the worst thing, that they're not violent necessarily, they've gotten into an altercation. But then when you put them into put them into prison for years, what you're doing is not only impacting them, but their family and their community. And if you look around, there's there are certain communities in which more people are incarcerated, and certain communities in which less people are incarcerated. When you talk, and there's lots of studies that show that has nothing to do with who actually commits certain types of crimes, but who is incarcerated for it. And so I think that what you're saying, and the other side of it, which you also pointed at, is that there are alternatives to incarceration. I mean, BLM was part of the effort to pass, Measure R and other alternatives, where we finally said no more prisons and more money to everything from education to social services to drug rehabilitation programs to employment. If somebody gets out of prison and then they constantly ask them, do you have a conviction? And then they don't give them a job. So just like you quoted from Psalms. So I wanted just one little question before I see Deb is here and signaling that we have to start soon. Somebody asked a clarifying question, which is why do you use the term houseless as opposed to homeless?
Because in communities like in urban communities, oftentimes we see the community as home. When we, in most hip hop songs, we represent a certain community. So NWA, straight out of Compton, right? Jay-Z would say something about New York, right? the whole New York song that he redid, right? When he talks about Brooklyn all the time. So we have a love-hate relationship with our communities here in America, right? And so in Skid Row is a community. We are proud to be from Skid Row because of some of the positive things that the media never expresses in Skid Row, like the fact that we have rooftop gardens and that we are at Aryeh Cohen and we're doing farmers market and we're getting ready to start the hip hop smoothie shop and all of these things to create positive alternatives for our community. So we want resources to go towards those type of things, towards building our communities. And so that's why we say houseless, because the issue is houselessness. People don't have a house to live in because they can't afford a house to live in. 70% of the people who are houseless in America actually are actually houseless, many of them in the community that they grew up in. People say it's a lot of people coming from other states to California. There's some of that going on, but the majority of that is not true. Most people and California is a place where people come from many different places just to California, period, to try and find resources and try and make a career for themselves if they're in music or entertainment industry and all of that. So that's an overall thing as it relates to California. But many of the people here in Skid Row are from either South Central or from the surrounding areas.
And finally, I know that even though that oftentimes it's from the depths of the darkest moments that you sometimes see the light. And I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but I find my spirit moved and when I'm with people who are working for justice, like when we had the George Floyd memorial, that was a powerful, powerful moment. So in that sense, I wanted to ask you if you feel optimistic.
I feel optimistic because of our work, because of our collective work, because of the work of our allies. Because to be clear, when people hear Black Lives Matter, they truly don't understand that Black Lives Matter is probably the most multi-ethnic movement ever in the history of the world, right? Historians are now saying that Black Lives Matter is probably and arguably the biggest or largest movement for social justice in America. That includes the civil rights movement, because predominantly it was mostly Black folks in that movement. But currently, if you look at Black Lives Matter and you look at some of the work that we're doing it with coalitions of all kinds of people, because there are people in America who are sick of the status quo. And if you miss Black Lives Matter or George Floyd was the spark, but when people take to the streets, they understand the same system that has California being going from the 6th largest economy in the world to the 5th largest economy in the world in 2018, with the widest income gap between the rich and the working poor, those who don't have health care, and it's through the roof. Education is an issue. All of those issues are connected. Student debt, all of those issues are connected. So when we come to fight, we come to fight in solidarity. Yeah, Black folks came here and changed, and so obviously we still have the change pulling our allies up with us, but this movement is not just about Black folks. It's about every marginalized group in this nation. And when we fight for justice, everyone has benefited. Women have benefited. Indigenous folks have benefited through Immigration Act. Asian folks have benefited. So we fight for everybody.
That's a great place to finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Cohen. Thank you, Pastor Cue, for your perspectives on this topic. And thank you to the audience for joining us this evening. We invite you to continue learning and engaging with us at B'Yachad Together. Please visit us online to see all that we have to offer at aju.edu. /biachad together. And we look forward to seeing you all online soon. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Blessings.